Comic Book Savant Extra, Episode 5. Welcome back to another episode of Comic Book Savant Extra. Like I told you, I was going to be putting these out more and more frequently just based on additional things that I wanted to talk about and go over. And also, as I thought about it and was mulling things over, I wanted to use the extra episodes kind of as more behind-the-scenes content and kind of get to open up a little bit more and let you guys get to know me more on a personal level and talk about some of my influences, which this episode is all about, the kind of top comics or stories or trades that really had a huge effect on influencing me as a comic book fan and what I like and what I don't like, as well as influencing me as a comic book podcaster as well. Again, so like I like having these episodes, and they're shorter than what your normal episode would be in most cases. But again, I just like pulling the curtain back and like just letting you guys to get to know me a little bit more and what kind of makes me tick and what goes into, I guess, putting the main show together. So again, just wanted to talk about some books that had like a huge effect, just affecting books that I just like really loved. And, going into, especially most of these books will kind of verge between before I started podcasting, books that kind of influenced me to, at times, maybe I dipped away or wasn't so active in reading comics that kind of reinvigorated me or pulled me back in. So let me get started. This list is in no particular order. They're just books that, I thought about. I was like, this might be something cool to do, because we all have those certain stories that kind of like call out to us personally, that are just like go-to stories. The first book I want to talk about is Avengers Forever. It came out back in 1998. It's written by Kurt Busiek. Artwork done by Carlos Pacheco. Inker is Jesus Moreno, and colorist is Scott Olive. I've reviewed this book and have talked about this book multiple times. Again, it's probably one of, if not my favorite Avengers story of all times that I've read to date. I haven't read every Avengers story ever, but out of them, I've read my share. This one just always resonates with me for some reason. I mean, when I originally read it, if I recall at the time, I got the individual issues and read the whole. It was a 12-issue limited series or maxi series that came out. I read the individual issues. I remember it was one of the first comic book orders I placed online, getting the individual issues, and I think I ordered these comics like off through MidtownComics.com, and I remember getting them. I was like so excited. The covers were just so, wonderful and varied, and had like different characters from different eras. It's a story heavily based around time travel, with the Avengers, and the centralized character is Rick Jones. And it's just such a great story seeing different Avengers from different time periods come together on this team and to save the world. And you're battling Kang, which is a villain that's heavily based in time travel. It's just a really good, very epic story. It was just one of my favorites, and it's one of the stories I like every so often I'll go back and reread. I've owned the individual issues, I've owned it in trade, I've owned it in hardcover, now I own it digitally, so it's a book every so many years I'll go back and reread. Next book is Kingdom Come. That was released in 1996. It was written by Mark Waid, artwork done by Alex Ross, and the lettering was done by Todd Klein. I actually just reread this earlier, and I'm going to be reviewing it on an upcoming episode of the show, revisiting it. It just had like its 20-year anniversary. not too, it was re-released about 2 years ago for the 20th anniversary of Kingdom Come. So I went back and reread the story, and they were doing a revisit of Kingdom Come and reviewing it. Like I said, I have that upcoming soon on the podcast. So this story, at a time where I was still buying comics and I'm still going to the comic store, I wasn't at this time as active in reading comics as much. My wife says I'm OCD. So, I always still, at that time, I remember, I don't even know if I was in school at that time in college or not. I think I was working full time. Maybe I wasn't in school. And, so I would go to the comic shop every so often. I wasn't going like every Wednesday. I would go, once every few months, pick up, see some covers that I like, picked up some books, and sometimes I would read maybe one or two of the books. Some of them I would just buy bag and board and like have off to the side. But it was something about Kingdom Come. I saw the covers of the trade paperback, and it caught my eye. I picked it up. I want to say it is the first trade paperback I ever purchased. Yes, Kingdom Come was the first trade paperback I ever purchased. I purchased a trade for it. I read that book so many times, like I literally broke the spine on it, and I bought it again, because I just love the story so much, and I gifted it to people. Like, it revigorated my love totally for comics and like reading what was going on, and it really like opened up that gateway for me to get back into comics and get into DC Comics, which growing up as a kid, I've talked about this on previous episodes of the podcast here and there, where I was living in North Carolina at the time. It wasn't a lot of comic book shops. I lived in a little town called Winterville, North Carolina. It's not a one stoplight town, but it's a very small town. When I say very small town, very small, but not one stoplight per se. But it was a relatively small, relatively small town. Now, the next closest town was Greenville, North Carolina, which is most notably known for East Carolina University, or ECU. A lot of famous alums like, if I'm not mistaken, Sandra Bullock went to East Carolina. Vince McMahon and Linda McMahon, they both graduated from East Carolina. So Greenville is a relatively decent sized, city, where Winterville is really like a town. It's pretty much at this point has become, more of a suburb of Greenville at this point. But it was one comic book shop, just one comic book shop in actual Greenville. So if I wanted to go to a comic book shop other than the local gas station that had a spinner rack, it was a trip into town. Like, it was a 15, 20-minute, commute to Greenville to go to the one comic shop. And it was not the best comic shop, but it was like the only thing I had. So really the only access I had was really accessible to me, where I could walk to the little, gas station and to the spinner rack, was all Marvel comics. They might have like one or two. Like the spinner rack was dominated by Marvel comics. So that was what I was limited to growing up. So, being at this time when Kingdom Come came out, I was in my early to mid 20s, and I was in Greensboro, North Carolina, which was more comic book shops. I mean, I think in Greensboro, it's a big college town. I think it might have been like 10 comic shops. So I went from very limited to a huge access point. So like I said, I would go and pick up more. So this like kind of triggered me, having access to DC Comics now. Like, I can go into any comic shop, and I had a huge variety. I had, I could get Image, DC, whatever that was available, I could pretty much get now from anywhere. It was plenty of comic shops sprinkled all around, because it was such a bigger city compared to where, I grew up, and kind of, before that point of, being an adult. So, which was really cool, which opened up the floodgates for me at that point. But like I read Kingdom Come Out, like I said, so many times, then it opened up the floodgates to me, getting into DC, start reading Nightwing, then Flash, then Green Lantern. At the time, it just like triggered a whole thing of me getting very much immersed back in the comics from where I had kind of before that point would read the odd book here and there, but not as heavy, as I became. And this is probably like, if I say one book influenced me the most into becoming a podcaster, I would probably say Kingdom Come like started me down that path that led me, 10 years later to come up with the idea of starting the podcast. Next book on my list would be Invincible. Probably the next two books on the list are both Robert Kirkman books. It would be Invincible, that series started back in 2003, as well as The Walking Dead. Invincible was written by Robert Kirkman, artwork done by Ryan Ottley and Corey Walker. Inker was Cliff Rathburn. Colorist is John Roche. I hope I pronounced it correctly. Lettering done by Russ Wooten. Walking Dead also started in 2003, written by Robert Kirkman. Charlie Adler is the artist. Inker Stefano Giordano. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Gray tones Cliff Rathburn, and lettering done by Russ Wooten as well. And these books really came into prominence to me right at the time when I was starting out podcasting. I was less than 30 episodes into the podcast. I was a huge fan of the Comic Geek Speak podcast, and they have a lot to do with me becoming a podcaster. To be honest with you, they were very instrumental. Between them and Comic Book Noise, they were really great, mentors, and I was fans of their individual podcasts, and I reached out to them, and they were great about helping me kind of come up with the concept and the outline of what my podcast was going to be. So I'm always thankful for them. And Comic Geek Speak had a meetup. They had like one for their 100th episode, and then they had one for their 300th episode. I want to say for their 100th episode meetup, I went. I was in Reading, Pennsylvania. I was in North Carolina. I drove up for the event, and I think it was like maybe the event was just for like the day, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And I just felt so much a part of the community, and the guys had been so nice to me when I had like reached out, and we had corresponded through emails through the different hosts, like just helping me out. Saying, I love the idea of you guys podcasting. I'm curious about it. What would I need to do to go about it? They just were so helpful. So I wanted to kind of like go meet them. So I went up to their celebration and they all met. They all were friends that worked at this particular comic shop. So they had it at the mall at like the comic shop. Or I think it was an empty space close to the comic shop. So we got a chance to go to the shop that they used to work at and frequent, and it was really cool. They had a great owner they used to tell stories about. He passed away shortly after that time, or in between. They had their 300, because I went to their 100 and 300 episode celebration. He passed maybe right after their 300 episode celebration that I went to. He was a really cool guy, and I always tell this story. He's the reason why I got into Walking Dead, which led me shortly thereafter into Invincible. I had ordered through In Stock Trades the first trade of The Walking Dead, and I read it, and I really didn't care for it. And I went in. His name was Lynn. So I went in, and I saw The Walking Dead hardcover that had the first 12 issues. Where I had bought the trade, it was the first 6 issues. And I read it, and I was like, yeah, it didn't really knock my socks off. And he said, if you buy it and you don't like it, I know you're not from town, But he's like, if you call me up, he gave me the store number. He's like, if you don't like it, I'll refund your credit card, whatever, and you just keep the book. And I was like, really? Like, that's a non-lose situation for me. So I bought the first Walking Dead hardcover, read the first 12 issues, and I fell in love with The Walking Dead, and I still read the comic to this day. Pretty much one of the few comics that I will constantly stay current with and read on a monthly basis. I always thought that was so cool that he was so confident in the product that he was selling. That he was like, hey, I'll sell this to you. If you find that you don't like it, I will refund your money, and you still could just keep the book and do whatever you want with it. Like, I've had two experiences of that happening, and in both books, I ended up really falling in love with. So that I always relate that story, and I always think about Lynn, God rest his soul. That like he was like that's the one of the beautiful things that I feel like is unparalleled about from when you shop online and you go into a local comic shop, when you have someone that really loves comics and loves the product, that knows, like, he saw that I was just looking around the store, and and I was like, I don't know, sir, I was like, and he's like, oh, I'm Lynn. I said, Lynn, I don't know. I was like, I've tried to trade and it didn't really set me on fire. And I was like, it's okay, it's okay. And he's like, you just got to read a little bit more. He's like, just trust me. He's like, trust me on this one. Pick it up, And I was like, okay, and I went with it. And it was like, how did he know? You wonder when someone was like, they know, like when they love the product and they have something like a store, they have to try and venture, through a whole bunch of different, things. So, he just knew, like, if I read just a little bit more, I would probably be hooked, and I was. Invincible was cool for me because I was bogged, like, coming back into comics at that time. I was coming in more and more, and comic books are never-ending stories, so I was bogged down in continuity through different books. So it was a turn-off, like, getting back into it. And I always loved Spider-Man, and I felt like Invincible kind of gave me that teenage angst of a hero just coming into his own, having to deal with powers and students, and being a student and family. But it was like the hybrid between old school Spider-Man with Superman, but modern and just very accessible. And I just fell in love with it just immediately, and I just love that series. I'm woefully behind. I have like 5 or 6 probably trades of Invincible that I need to read to start to get caught up. I know the series recently ended, if I'm not mistaken, not too long ago. I think it's already ended last year sometime. So I want to finish reading the series because I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Next book is Nightwing, 1996. This is another experience I had where I went into a comic shop and the guy was like, buy the one issue. If you don't like it, you can bring it back. I'll give you a full refund on it. This was written by Chuck Dixon, artwork done by Scott McDaniel, ink work done by Carl Story, colorist done by Roberta Tuez. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And lettering done by John Costanza. I went to one of the comic shops. Actually, it was by the college that I was going to at the time. A smaller little comic shop. Went in, was just looking around. I was debating about Nightwing. I didn't know that Nightwing was Dick Grayson, the original Robin. He saw me looking it over, and I kept just kind of mulling over if I was going to buy it or not. And he explained to me that, Dick Grayson is the Nightwing character. I think it was, I'm trying to remember. It was issue 6 of Nightwing, if I remember correctly. It was issue 6 or issue 8. One or the other. And he, like he said, he's like, pick it up. If you don't like it, bring it back. I'll give you your money back. No big deal. I was like, cool. And I think I went home, read it, and went back and bought all the rest of the issues that he still had on the shelf at the time, and in that series, in that original Chuck Dixon series. And I collected that whole series till it ended. And I've always loved Dick Grayson as a character. If you've listened to this podcast any amount of time, you know how much my love goes for Dick Grayson. So that's one book that it really had an influence, on me, and that I love. That's kind of one of those cornerstones of, like, if I had my greatest hits, that would be that series, specifically the Chuck Dixon issues, which his original run on the comic, I think, went from issue 1 to 50. Then he came back later in the series, and he did Nightwing Year 1. And he did that storyline as well. I think it was in the 100 somewhere. Next is the Thunderbolts, which started back in 1997. The original series was written by Kurt Busiek. The art was done by Mark Bagley. Inker was Scott Hanna. Colorist was Joe Rojas. And lettering was done by Comic Craft. Just a fun comic. Kurt Busiek's writing with Mark Bagley's like upbeat, energetic pencils. The whole big twist at the end of the first issue that they were, Baron Zemo and a group of villains, the Masters, what is it? What are they called? The Masters of Evil, that were in disguise, disguising themselves as heroes. That plot twist was like just sick at the time, and it was just It was a fun comic, just like through that run, and it continued to be good even later on in this run. They got a little bit more legitimate. Zemo kind of got kicked off the team. They brought Hawkeye in as a leader for the Thunderbolts. It got better and better. It was a great series for a very long time. It's been different volumes of Thunderbolts since this original run, with different takes on it. The original series is still like one of my favorite of all time. It was just fun, and just seeing these villains pretending to be heroes, then slowly in the process some becoming heroes, while others were still had villainous ties and kind of eventually broke away, and so forth. It was just really groundbreaking at the time, because we hadn't seen that done. It's more and more common nowadays, but back then that was really groundbreaking. That was one of the first series to kind of delve in something like that along those lines. Next is Young Avengers, which was done in 2005. It was written by Alan Heinberg, Jim Chung, John Dell. It was written by Alan Heinberg. Artwork done by Jim Chung. Inker was John Dell. Colorist was Justin Ponsor. And lettering was done by Corey Pettit. Alan Heinberg, at the time, he was big in Hollywood. He was the OC was like a really big show at the time. He had done that, and he had done some writing and producing of other kind of big Hollywood TV shows at the time. He had a love for comics. Marvel brought him in. He did this 12-issue series with Jim Chung. I want to say at that point, Jim Chung, maybe this was the first time I saw his artwork. Maybe I saw Jim do some stuff on Iron Man before then. I could be wrong, but I think it was like really the first time I saw Jim Chung's artwork was with Young Avengers. John Dell, I had known him from his work on, not too long before this, on the JLA comic that was written by Grant Morrison over at DC, so I was familiar with him, his work. But this was just a great series. He created some very great, very, very good characters. One of my favorite characters to this day still is Kate Bishop, Hawkeye. And that we have Alan Heinberg to credit for that. Probably, even though it's not technically an Avengers story, it's an Avengers adjacent story, but one of my favorite, I would probably classify Young Avengers as probably my second favorite Avengers story of all time. That's how good it is. They try to do different iterations of Young Avengers. It was never as good as what Alan Heinberg and Jim Chung did. And Jim Chung now is he's over at DC, but I always would have loved, and maybe one day down the road we would get him and Alan Heinberg to come back together and do some kind of Young Avengers, like another 12-issue maxi series or something to that effect. And I know Alan Heinberg, he co-wrote Wonder Woman. So I don't know if he's still kind of in the fold with like DC or not. But I would love, down the road to see them reteam to do some sequel, because just the other versions of Young Avengers that weren't attached to them, I just never could get into. I tried, but I just couldn't. Or maybe deep down my heart, I just wouldn't allow it, because the first was just, their original was just so good. I was introduced to Jessica Jones. I did not know, because I didn't read Alias before that. So I was first introduced to Jessica Jones in that series, as well as the team's mentor. So that, and you guys know I love Jessica Jones as a character, and this is where I fell in love with her as well, and was introduced to her through this series. So again, had a big influence on me just because it introduced me to characters that I've become so enamored with over time. Next series is Star Wars Legacy. It came out in 2006, written by John Ostrander, artwork done by Jane Dorsma, ink work done by Dan Parsons, colorist Brad Anderson, lettering done by Michael David Thomas. This was great. It's Legends, considered Legends now. None of it is canon. It was great. It was one of my first really ongoing Star Wars comics before all the new Marvel stuff that's been coming out. It was set like 100 years in the future. It was a descendant of the Skywalkers. He went into hiding. It was a very, very interesting story. It was a very good series. It was written so well. John Ostrander is one of the best writers of all time. They gave him, they set it enough in the future. He fleshed it out extremely well. He had a great core villain, great core cast of characters. It was just such a fun series. And Jan Dorsma's pencils are phenomenal. This was just such a great series. I went back when Disney acquired Marvel and all that, and they got the rights to revert back to them. When they re-released this whole series, I think it was like through 4 trades. They traded off the whole original Legacy series, because they did a couple of other Legacy series. But the original, I think it's 3 trades or 4 trades total that has the whole series, and they did a limited series. I think it was called Legacy War. That was after the original series ended, to put a cap on that whole run by Dorsma and Ostrander. And I have all those in trade. I want to say it's 3 or 4 trades worth. Next is Marvel Team Up. It came out 2004. Written by Robert Kirkman. Scott Collins is the artist. Colors were done by Studio F, and lettering is done by Chris Iliopoulos. This is just a straight up fun series. It was written by Robert Kirkman at the time. He was doing his creator-owned stuff with Walking Dead and with Invincible. He was still doing a ton of work over at Marvel, and this series was about I think it's like 4 trades total. It was just a fun series, and he took the concept of, if all these heroes are in New York, they at some point they would have to cross paths. And it was this fun, lighthearted, silly. It had some serious tones to it, but it was really just fun. It was just really fun, upbeat. You got Robert Kirkman, snappy, witty, like dialogue. You have Scott Collins, like hyper energetic pencils. It was just really super, super fun and jokey, kind of snarky at parts. And like I said, it lasted maybe like 25 issues. So like I said, I think roughly it's 4 trades. For the longest time, and I've talked about this before, they weren't available digitally. They have become available digitally now, so you can actually pick those up, because the trades were becoming harder and harder to find. But now all the trades are digital. I found them on Comixology, so you can get those now, which I'm so thankful. I need to pick those up too, because I love that series. It was just so fun. Next, Batman: The Long Halloween. So the next kind of 3 choices are kind of grouped together. So let me just go through them all at once. Batman: The Long Halloween, 1996, written by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale. Written by Jeff Loeb, art done by Tim Sale, colorist is Gregory Wright, and lettering done by Richard Starkins. And they also, the same team, collaborated to do Batman Dark Victory in 1999, and they also did Superman for All Seasons, which came out in 1998. All the same creative team. I could pretty much list all of the collaborations that these guys had done together over the years, but these three stand out for me because I'm a huge Batman fan. When I finally bought the trade, I think Batman: The Long Halloween was the second trade I ever bought after Kingdom Come. And I've read this so many times. It's been a while since I've reread The Long Halloween. I used to actually read it every year during the Halloween season. I would always break out The Long Halloween. The sequel, Dark Victory, is the sequel to The Long Halloween. Superman for All Seasons. People know that I'm not the biggest Superman fan. It is, to me, hands down, the single best Superman story I've ever read. And it's one of the few Superman stories that I personally love. Their collaborations are phenomenal. I got a chance at Heroes Con that normally happens every year during Father's Day in Charlotte, North Carolina. I got a chance to actually meet and talk to Tim Sale. He was the coolest dude. I had an autographed copy of The Long Halloween. It was kind of a beat-up copy, but I got him to sign it. Had some financial issues, and I ended up having to sell it on eBay, but it was, which sucked. But I got a chance to meet him in person, and he was one of the coolest guys ever, and he was just so funny because when I saw him, he looked like an actor or like a rock star. He looked like he needed to be a band somewhere, but he was so cool because I just, I'll never forget when I was like, I slid, waited in line for a long time, waited through the line, and I just had the one trade, and I slid it in front of him. And I was like, I'm a huge fan of your work. And he looks up at me, and he stands up, and he shakes my hand, and he, just tells me, like, it's cool. Like, most people just shove books in front of his face to turn around and end up selling on eBay, which I eventually did, but it was years later, and I was broke, and I needed money. But, like, how, like, people, you could see the people, like, in line that had just, like, bought, like, tons of books that you knew they were just like, hey, sign this, sign this, sign this. And he wasn't charging people to autograph anything. You just had to wait in line. But people, like, he was just saying how people would abuse the privilege. And he's like, he would know that the stuff was, going on eBay the moment they left. And just how it was like this kind of distressing to him, and that most people don't just say what I said, like, hey, I'm a huge fan of your work, I appreciate what you do. It was the funniest thing, and I was like, I would never have thought that, and that, as I always remember Tim Sale for that, and like, he's like super cool people. That one time I got to meet him and talk to him just for that brief moment. Next is 52. This is right around the time, this was starting up right when I was really getting this podcast going, and it was, the weekly series that DC did. That was a huge risk. It was setting the industry abuzz when it was coming out. You had Jeff Johns writing it, Grant Morrison, Greg Rucka, Mark Waid, those four of the biggest writers in comics at the time, setting up to do this series, coming out weekly. It was so fun, and it was like a great way starting off the podcast as well, because you had this huge event that was going on that was something that was monumental and historic in just comics at the time. I mean, DC kept doing it, and they did it to the ground, but they did it right with this first series, and probably was their best attempt of all their different projects they did that were year-long weekly series. The stories were so good. The characters that they developed, Renee Montoya as the Question, bringing Batwoman and their relationship, Booster Gold, Black Adam, like, oh my God, 52. If you haven't read 52, you owe it to yourself to pick if you can get the omnibus, if you get it a physical copy, or if you can get the just get the 4 individual trades. However you can get 52, if you haven't read it, you need to get it and read it. It is awesome. Next I have, let me just go individually with them. First is 100 Bullets. Came out, and the series started in 1999. It's written by Brian Azzarello, artwork done by Eduardo Riso, colorist is Grant Golesh, and lettering is done by Clem Robbins. This series is it's a DC Vertigo series, and it was when I was getting into the podcast and people were suggesting different books to me, I was just trying different stuff, and Vertigo had a lot of creator-owned books that were just like different off the beaten path, and I just would try people like try 100 Bullets, try DMZ, try Ex Machina. So I was just trying different books just to see what stuck with me and what I liked, and it was just something about Brian Azzarello's writing that just captured me like right off the bat. And I haven't finished the series yet. I've done different spotlights, and I've done of the first few trades of the series. I think I have like 3 more trades that I need to read. I own 2 of them, and I need to buy the last one. But I'm going to finish this series sooner or later. But it's just phenomenal crime. I guess it's crime noir is the best way to kind of describe it. And it's very gritty and grimy. This is adult only type content when you start talking about 100 Bullets, but just a great series. If you've ever seen like Sin City, is a more realistic, grounded kind of Sin City. If you want a quick pitch on it, is how I could best describe like 100 Bullets. Last but not least, one of the most books that had a big influence on me is Wonder Woman. The 2011, when they did the New 52 and Brian Azzarello was announced, I was like I'll never forget this. I was totally shocked when they announced Brian Azzarello. I was like, I've read 100 Bullets. He's done some Batman stuff. He's done different things over the years. Most of the stuff creator owned, like Vertigo stuff, and now he's doing some stuff over at Image. So when they were like, the new creative team for Wonder Woman, and they were like Brian Azzarello, and then there was like artwork done by Cliff Chang, and then Dan Green, and inker Matthew Wilson, colorist, and Jarrett K. Fletcher as the letterer. I was like, what? I was like, Cliff Chang artwork. I said, okay, I'm familiar with him. And I'm like, then Brian Azzarello? I was like, really? It was like, man. And it was so good. I love his run on Wonder Woman. He did such great work on the character. He was a good fit if you read 100 Bullets. When he wrote the stuff he did for Batman, I liked it. It was a fit. It was because he was more grounded, like gritty, boots to the ground type writing. So it was a fit. But Wonder Woman, I was like, really? But it just showed how well-rounded a writer he is, and he killed it. He knocked it out of the box, and I just loved it. And I loved Greg Rucka's run on Wonder Woman, so I'm a huge fan of the Wonder Woman character in comics. They just, it's those are historic runs for me. Rucka's run, his pre-rebirth run on Wonder Woman that he did before the New 52, years before. Both runs of Rucka's and this run of Brian Azzarello are my like trinity of runs for Wonder Woman that, if you're a reader, research those runs and get those and enjoy them, because it's some of the best Wonder Woman storytelling that you're going to find. But those are just some of the books. They were in no particular order, but just books that really influence are like my go-to kind of stories and arcs or runs that influence me the most on what I like and what kind of, is kind of like on my bookshelf, my virtual bookshelf of like go-to kind of like stories that, impacted me a certain way, that like inspired me or brought me out of my comfort zone of what I had at that point and really opened me up to more and different concepts of the comics that I like and that I read, and that opened up new genres to me. So there it is in a nutshell. Like I said, this ended up being longer because I gave you some background, and that's kind of what I wanted to use these Comic Book Savant extra ones. Like I said, to find out kind of what makes me tick and share those kind of things with you. Hopefully, if you haven't read any of the books or some of these books that I just talked about, maybe with the passion that hopefully I talked about them, then it might spark your interest and might lead you to the path to check them out, and you might have the same amount of love that I end up having for them. And that's my hope anyway. That would be kind of cool. But anyway, that's all I have for you guys for this episode. You can follow me on social media, always at Comic Book Savant on Twitter and Instagram. You can go to the website at any time, www.comicbooksavant.com, and find me there. That's all I have for this episode of Comic Books Savant Extra number 5, and I'll see you guys next time. You guys take care. Have a good week. Talk to you soon.